My husband Joseph and I spent 10 years in the CIA, right on the heels of 9/11, and a very interesting time to be a counterterrorism specialist and Arab world specialist in the CIA.
Do you think that if there was a change in administration, that things might work out for the better?
From a foreign policy perspective, I would say yes. Just having judged what I saw in the first Trump administration versus the current administration and the relationships with other countries at those times. At a time in the world where everything feels so unstable and chaotic. At the same time, this is a beautiful moment to provide good leadership.
You get a call from the CIA, Michelle, we need you back out of retirement.
I'll tell you the first thing that I would do. I would
What's going on, Choicers? Welcome to another episode of the Millennial's Choice Show. Today, our guest, she's not new to the channel, but I'm excited to have her, especially in this crazy time that we're living in. There's wars and rumors of wars and terrorism and protests and all this kind of stuff. And I want to welcome back to our show, former CIA counterterrorism operative. We've got a keynote speaker, author of the memoir, I want to get this right, Breaking Cover, Counterintelligence and Arab World Specialist, Michelle Rigby-Assad. Welcome back to the Millennial's Choice Show, Michelle.
Thanks, Matthew. Great to be here.
And did I get that right? I wanted to make sure, like former CIA undercover operative, counterterrorism, and you're a specialist in that because people watch our first interview. You've got so much schooling behind you and your story of how you joined the CIA and the position that was open and all that undercover work you did. Can you kind of give us the Spark Notes, the Coles Notes version of all of that for us?
Sure. So the summary is that my husband Joseph and I spent 10 years in the CIA right on the heels of 9/11. So obviously a very important part of U.S. and world history, and a very interesting time to be a counterterrorism specialist and Arab world specialist in the CIA, as you can imagine. So we spent 10 years. Most of that time we spent abroad working undercover, and we had 5 overseas tours. And so worked in war zones and other very challenging locations. The CIA lets us tell people that we were in Iraq for a year. So we were in Baghdad. And so we've been out of the CIA, retired from government work for 12 years. And we work now as consultants to companies that do a lot of work in the Middle East. So we're basically called on when people have problems and they need someone to help with diplomacy and negotiation with government, because no business can be done without government in the Middle East. So yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah, so it's funny because when I talked to my mom about coming to Canada when she fled Iraq and came here, like she told me that she just left with all of her gold and she wore all her gold, and then along the way, wherever a bribe had to take place, that's what she used it for. So then she came to the country with nothing left by the time she made it here. So is it still very much wild, wild west over there, or there's a little bit more order and organization? What are you finding?
Well, it really depends on where you are. So if you're talking about places like Egypt today is very different than when I started traveling there in 1991. It's actually shockingly different. And then you've got places like Yemen, which are even worse, falling apart at the seams. And so is Lebanon. So it really depends on which country you're talking about.
Insane. It's so sad. Like a lot of people that aren't too familiar with that region, they don't realize like how beautiful it was, how rich in culture and like resources it is. Are you seeing what, I know you've commented on other content that I've watched recently, but are you seeing what's happening in Lebanon and with, Iran and Israel and all that? And is your heart just like going out for those people? Like, I feel like your heart's probably breaking for those people.
So yeah, my heart breaks. So let me be clear about what that means. Like, unfortunately, Iran slash Hezbollah has taken over the country of Lebanon, and it's taken a place that was considered at one point the Paris of the Middle East, and has absolutely destroyed it. Anytime Iran comes waltzing in the door and starts increasing its strength through proxies, it destroys countries economically, politically. So Lebanon is essentially a non-functioning state. People can't even get money out of their bank accounts. Things are so bad in Lebanon. To see what has happened, there's maybe a couple of politicians in the entire country who have not sold out to Iran or Hezbollah, and those people are always fighting just to stay alive and not be assassinated. So when you see that kind of activity, yeah, absolutely, it's heartbreaking. My husband was born in Lebanon. We could not go there. No way could I set foot in Lebanon. I'd be killed. So would my husband.
Wow. So some people are going to watch this and hear you and say, you know what? It's easy for you to say. You're in America. Your religious belief is not that which is the dominant one in the Middle East. Like, it's easy to point the finger or blame, but really, like, the other side is the problem. What makes you so sure and so confident about your position that it is what Iran is doing that's causing the problems?
Actually, you could just watch the timeline of history as it goes on. And the more that Iran involved itself in Lebanon, the more it fell apart. It seems quite obvious to me. And I don't know many people who are, even Sunni Arabs totally agree with me on this. Sunni Arabs and Sunni Arab countries hate Iran, hate Hezbollah, and surprisingly, even though they've been putting out statements to, that slightly to the contrary about what Israel did to Hezbollah behind closed doors, they're all like amazed and really happy to see it happen because they're not on the same side.
Wow. So, okay, can you unpack that a little bit? Why is it that organizations like Hezbollah or Hamas seem to be, there's people that are rallying behind them, some people, and a lot of them calling them freedom fighters, etc. But why is there that kind of passion there to support them when then there's this other side of people that are saying, we don't want anything to do with them? Why do you think it's not more one-sided for people to say, we don't want anything to do with them and they're terrorists, it's a terrorist organization? Why do you think there's that division? Or is that just the media making it seem like there's two sides to the story? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's complicated because I think you have the entire spectrum. I think you have people who are pretty knowledgeable about the Middle East and on the same page and understand what Hamas really is. Hamas has not been good for the Palestinian people. Hamas assassinated, it's the Iranian influence. Hamas assassinated the peaceful members, the Palestinian politicians that wouldn't agree with them and wouldn't be used by them. So the people who seem to support what's going on right now have very minimal, if any, knowledge of what has actually happened in the region. And I don't want to sound like a total jerk, but a lot of them are really useful idiots. They learned about the conflict a week ago and they don't know. And it is one of the most complicated issues in the world to understand. Even for myself, when I've spent so much time in the region, in order to try to stay abreast, I have to read all kinds of outlets, the right, the left, the center, and you're always trying. There's so much going on that it's almost a full-time job just to keep up with what's the latest developments in the area. So it's unfortunate because people want to know, is it good, is it bad? I'm like, oh, I hate that question. That's a terrible question. It's too complicated because there's 1,000 shades of gray.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's other scenarios of this around the world and in other countries, especially in history. We can go back and take a look. But yeah, there isn't a one answer fits all, I think, when it comes to this matter. It's thousands of years old and there's so much systemic stuff. And a lot of it is also
layers.
So
many layers.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I
Yeah.
both know there's politics, but if you truly want to understand things that happen in the Middle East, you have to take yourself outside of that Canadian or American mindset where it's all politics, but it has nothing to do with religion, because we get very uncomfortable to talk about religion and politics, very uncomfortable. But the reality is, many parts of the world, you cannot separate the two things. So you're talking about multiple layers of conflict going back to, holy books and, in the Quran, they've got the Hadith, you've got all of these things that complicate the process because at a very foundational a place, it's kind of telling you what the order of the world should be and everything. So if you don't understand that, then you are not going to understand anything about the greater, issues that are going on between
Yeah.
Sunni and Shia, between Muslims and non-Muslims, between, any way you look at that, there is a religious component to it. And once you start mentioning that in the United States or Canada, we'd be just like, oh, we don't want to talk about that. But you have to, if you're going to understand it.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean it's a part of it. Like what you're saying, it's a part of it. So you have to be willing to understand it. And it's funny because when certain sides are taken here in Canada, for example, that mentality of the Westerners, it's like you guys don't even know what's going on. You've probably never even left Canada or visited the Middle East. Like I don't even comment on it because I'm not like I'm from there. My parents are, but I'm born here in Canada, so I don't really comment on it either because I wasn't raised there. I wasn't born there. I didn't really see what my parents saw. So my parents will have a completely different take on it compared to other Canadians that have never been there. And like rightfully so, they've experienced it
Yeah.
firsthand, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And, it's, everybody's got a story, and stories will give you a very interesting insight into the culture and politics of a region for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think happens? You guys are in America about 40 days or so away from an election, one of the biggest elections in the history of the world. And, there's one side is saying if I was in power, it would never happen. The other side is kind of like, I don't know what they're doing. And so what do you think happens in November? Let's just say, depending on which candidate it gets voted in, how do you think things play out?
Yeah. So from what I can tell, well, first of all, no one knows what's going to happen in our elections. It's going to be very close. So no matter what happens, you're going to have about half the country that's deeply unsatisfied and unhappy with the outcome. So you've got that. And then to complicate things, you've got what's happening in the Middle East is affecting what's going on in our own countries. And I'll give you an example. It's just come out that Iran is doing its best to try to plot an assassination attempt against Donald Trump and former President Trump. So you've got this external player that we have intelligence saying that they want to kill him in order to sow chaos and instability in the United States. So and then you've got ISIS and Sunni terrorist organizations that are taking advantage of the Middle East instability to try to bring that into the West as well. And so I expect, because there's so many people with so much emotion about these issues, when they can't do something about it, people will look for opportunities. And those are the people who are often recruited into terrorist organizations or become lone wolves in order to show the world their position on these issues. So I have an unfortunate feeling that we're going to see kind of an uptick in terrorism, which is directly related to what is happening in the Middle East right now.
That's a very, very interesting perspective. That's so. Do you think that there's how would you stop this? You get a call from the CIA, Michelle. We need you back out of retirement. We want you to, you have free reins. Is there a way to solve this? Is there a clear path?
I'll tell you the first thing that I would do. I would go back to the Sunni Arab countries, and I would improve relationships with them, particularly Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, We're on shaky ground with Egypt because we know there are elements in Egypt who have helped Hezbollah with weaponry and things like that. But the bottom line was our administration turned its back on the Arab countries when they said they wanted protection from Iran. Turned our back. Immediately, within the next week, they turned to Russia. And that's our fault. We cannot blame that on anyone besides us. We did that. And so the Arabs have always wanted strong relationships with their country. And because we don't have enough people in the US government who truly understand the Middle East, we have had these really good opportunities to strengthen ties, and we've not done that. That's the first place you start.
And
then you make sure to help Israel win the war against Hezbollah and Hamas, and that for me is a prerequisite to moving things forward in a positive manner. You cannot negotiate with terrorists who have said no matter what, from the river to the sea, we want to wipe you off. You just cannot. That's not a negotiation. That's not an issue that can be negotiated. So they have to win against those terrorists, but we also have to, and quite honestly, the Sunni Arab states, they don't want terrorism to gain a foothold, because you know what? That causes them trouble. So in Egypt, for instance, you've got 100 million people there. It's a country full of very passionate individuals. And unfortunately, if you don't harness that in some way, or if you don't turn that into something positive, it's going to revisit you in terms of terror issues. Egypt has had issues with terrorism for decades, but when I first started traveling to Egypt, 1991, we were getting searched constantly. We had to go through metal detectors everywhere because Egypt had such a profound terrorism problem at that point in Upper Egypt. And they're going to be dealing with those issues again if they keep stoking the fires of unrest with regard to the Israel issue. You can't separate those things emotionally. And Egypt should have learned that lesson, but I'm not sure that they have.
So it's interesting you brought up the Saudi Arabia and UAE, because they seem like they've been really progressive recently, and they've been bringing on a lot of, like, for me, I love watching sports, and there's been a lot of sporting events, and there's been a lot of movement to really open up those countries, those areas for tourism, for tourists, and the real estate market's booming and all that fun stuff. I think Steve Wynn is even talking about opening up a casino there. No, I'm pretty sure.
Sure.
Which is
I'm not.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The Saudi Arabia today is not the Saudi Arabia that I have traveled to in the past. In fact, it's shocking. It's absolutely mind-bendingly different. And so it behooves them. They want stability, because you cannot bring in live golf, and you can't bring in concerts, and you can't, invest in real estate in an unstable place. So that's why they really wanted to consolidate, in security and improve their relationship with the United States and others. And we missed that opportunity. They know they can't do it on their own. They know they do need a larger, alliance. And Iran has the capability to mess things up for them. So I'll give you an example of what that means.
Please.
Right just below Saudi Arabia is Yemen. And Yemen right now is in the hands of Shia extremists, which are called the Houthis, which is the name of the family or the tribe that this extremism started in. They used to be located solely in North Yemen, which is right on the border with Saudi Arabia. And they caused a lot of problems for the Saudis, lobbing rockets across the border. So, Iran can be a real irritant to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, with that, with their placement, with their location. But then also you have one of the busy shipping corridors in the world through the Red Sea and through that area right there. And that affects the entire world. So Iran, via the Houthis, could really and have profoundly affected the shipping cost. Do you want to know why sometimes our prices are raising? Look to Iran. Thank Iran for that.
Thank you, Iran. Jeez.
I know.
Like,
I mean, it's
come on.
there are other issues as well, but that is a very significant shipping issue. At some point, the logistics, the carrier said, we don't even want to go through that area anymore. We've got to, go different routes, longer routes, more difficult. And those things are more expensive. So goods have got to move.
So on that topic of the Saudis and the UAE, we missed that opportunity to strengthen those relationships. Why do you think that the government at the time, the administration, did not take advantage of that? Like, why would they not? Especially because more recently, the oil that they have, they started openly saying we're willing to negotiate in other forms of currency. And usually that started a lot of wars in the past with petro wars and petrodollars, right? So I think, there was a big change that happened this year that kind of went, very unnoticed, or it wasn't really talked about in the media. But that's a big deal that they are starting to do business after, I don't know, I think 80 years of committing to just trading oil in US dollars. That's a really big deal. Why do you think the US just kind of, didn't work on that, or didn't really put more of an emphasis on that?
It's a very good question, and I have a theory, and I am not a conspiracy theorist, and this isn't conspiracy, but there have been enough articles, there have been enough indications that Iran has individuals in the government that it has essentially recruited in this administration to carry the water for Iran. And so I believe that those individuals have had a significant amount of power. There have been several articles, which are very underreported, where they've named individuals who it is believed, and it could be that the FBI is investigating this right now and they just don't have the information that they want to release. But there are names of people in DOD and in National Security Council who are Iranian agents, and they have had, I think, a very profound effect on trying to cool the U.S. relationship with these Sunni Arab countries. I think that's one reason. There may be more, but that's one.
Well, it would explain the billions of dollars that was sent to Iran just like a couple of years ago, no?
Yeah, yes, it would.
Or last year, whenever it was. I mean,
yes, it does.
Billions, right? So that's insane. That's a scary thought. That's a scary thought. So recently, this 2024 was the year where we had the most elections worldwide that took place and are taking place. And just recently, Iran did get a new, correct me if I'm wrong, a president, or
Yes.
It's the new president.
Yes.
Obviously, the former president, he passed away in the helicopter crash. And I haven't really done any homework on this new president, but what are you hearing about him, or what do you know about him?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't done much digging on him, but what I find quite interesting, that helicopter went down and multiple, it wasn't just the president, but several people died in that helicopter crash. And then you never heard another thing about it. And if you know anything about places like Iran, they're like North Korea, where they're like, it was the West. The first thing they say, it was the United States or it was Israel. Well, they didn't say a word and they didn't accuse anyone. And then it went away. Poof. And so our theory, as Joseph and I were discussing it, our theory is that it was possibly an inside job. And that's why it just went away so quickly. No one's talking about it. And they don't want people to know that there's cracks in the facade, that this Iranian government has any issues, but we know that they are profoundly not supported by the people. The Iranian people themselves are some of the most modern individuals. They're smart, they're well educated. They don't want a theocracy. Nobody can believe that this theocracy is still going. And so I actually think that it's possible they're quite weak. And they're doing these things it's like that loud bark when the animal is already wounded. And that if we could really be more strategic, come together with the world community and say, okay, what can we do to ensure that Iran isn't able to gather more resources from more countries, such like Africa, like they're trying right now, in order to keep control over the country of Iran. I mean, the Iranian people, by and large, can't stand the regime. they can you imagine having to live under a regime like that, where if you don't cover your head properly, you're going to get killed in an Iranian prison cell? Like,
It's hard to really fathom that in 2024 going into 2025.
yeah, right. I
It's hard to
know.
fathom that.
This regime came into power in 1979.
Yeah.
1979. That's crazy.
Yes. Yes. And so like, I did see something a couple days ago with this new president where he denied that Iran provided Russia with any missiles or any rockets, a particular weapon. And then it came out that it was factual that they did. And so you never know, but I would go back to that analogy about the dog and say the problem with a desperate dog is it might do anything to, kind of reinforce its position.
Yeah.
So when someone's desperate or they feel that they're losing, there's nothing else to lose, there's always this concern or risk that they might be willing to do something a little bit more drastic. What I find,
right, and then also, if you think about it, Matthew, sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
But you might be, I think you're younger than me, so you might not remember. But like during the Cold War in the Soviet Union, it was like the darkest before the dawn, like before things started falling apart in the Soviet Union, and and we thought they were so strong, and we thought they were going to be coming over the border at any moment, when in fact they were dying economically. And that their economic issues are what led to really the downfall of the Soviet Union. And I really believe that Iranian regime is a very, very similar position. And Reagan was very, he had such great leadership on this issue. And it was that strong, when you think back to how he acted, it was strong and it was confident, and that worked. That worked with the Iranians, and that also worked with Russia. And I think we need that same type of leadership right now.
Yeah. So when we're talking about Russia, like I find it very interesting in the interview with Vladimir Putin that Tucker Carlson put out, where he said, no one's called me from the current administration to try to solve this war with Ukraine. And he gave us a really good history from his perspective, Russian history. And it was very interesting to find that, he's, from his perspective, made a lot of attempts to really be very close to the U.S., and the U.S. wasn't having it. And, now no one's even making a phone call, yet billions and billions of dollars, I think we're probably even in the trillions maybe, being sent to Ukraine, or hundreds of billions being sent to Ukraine. But yet nobody's picked up the phone and called, the Russian president. So it could be a lot of inside stuff that you're talking about for sure. That's kind of stringing it along. What are your thoughts on that with the Russians? Do you ever have any experience that with the Russians, or just personal?
I would say that I've had a little bit of experience, although I'm not necessarily an expert in that region. But I know one thing about that interview. It was such a carefully crafted interview and narrative, and it was so carefully crafted that I couldn't even hardly bring myself to watch it. There was a lot of disinformation packed into that interview, but there are pieces of truth, right? Like the best kind of misinformation is that in which there is a foundation of truth and then you spring off from it. And so I do think there's some truth in when he was talking about the fact that he hadn't been contacted by our administration. That is probably accurate. But he's like a master. He's a master of misinformation. So you got to watch that dude, disinformation, very, very carefully.
Yeah, because, ex-KGB agent, right? So it's
exactly
right. There's a lot of deception in that for sure.
So much deception, yeah.
When it comes to the Iranian, this is just a sidebar that just came to mind. We're in the real estate business here. That's our primary business. And we work with a lot of landlords and investors. And so right now, if you're not Canadian, you're not able to, or you don't have your permanent residency status, you're not actually able to buy real estate in Canada. It's called a foreign buyer's ban. And because there's apparently not enough inventory for Canadians, and the current government that's in power here is blaming, foreign buyers as a part of the problem, investors that are part of the problem, that first-time home buyers cannot get into the market, and it's unaffordable for Canadians. So a lot of people that are coming here are renting. They have to rent when they get here, and there's a lot of people. There are many people coming from Iran, and they're having a hard time getting their money out of Iran. And I think they're limited to $10,000 a day. Or do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there are such strict limits on the movement of money between Iran and anywhere else, or anywhere else to Iran, for sure. And I could totally see that being a difficulty for people who've escaped the regime, and hopefully aren't regime members, but a lot of them are probably just innocent people caught up in this and just wanting to make a better life for themselves. Though I totally understand the government's position on that. I know that countries like New Zealand has, the Chinese have invested so much in buying properties, all their corrupt monies and things that New Zealanders can't afford. It's the same situation there. I know in New York City, that's very similar in terms of Chinese and Russian buying real estate there. So you have to say, like, how do we protect our own people so that they can afford housing in their own country? And I get that, but I also get that there's a lot of people that are affected by that who you want them to have something better as well. Like, how do you make that work? That's hard.
Yeah, it's very, very hard, because a lot of people came out and said, well, that's racist. But at the same time, like, we have borders for a reason, countries for a reason.
Yeah, I don't think that's racism. I think that's just one of those silly terms people throw out when they disagree with something.
Yes.
I think that's protecting your people of all races.
It's the woke Gen Zs and liberals that exist here in Canada, Michelle. It's these damn millennials that are being educated in these universities nowadays that are thinking this way. But I wanted to just talk about a little bit about the upcoming election. So do you think that if there is a change in administration, that things might work out for the better? Do you think that's a possibility, or what do you think?
From a foreign policy perspective, I would say yes. Just having judged what I saw in the first Trump administration versus the current administration and the relationships with other countries at those times, I'm a little bit concerned that the Kamala Harris side does not have very deep roots in foreign policy or knowledge of foreign policy. And already I've seen some of their positions concern me. On the Trump side, he didn't always have his act together and putting together a strong administration. And there were people in his administration who were not very experienced. But at the same time, I thought his position aligned more with creating good, strong relationships with our allies and made our allies feel more confident. So in terms of when I look very specifically at the Middle East, I do think that a Republican administration would be better for that issue than a Democratic administration.
At this point in time, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But who knows? Who knows who's going to win?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and then the aftermath of it all. I didn't realize, again, separate countries. I know when America sneezes, Canada catches a cold. That's the old saying we have, but we do focus a lot on American politics here. Ours is not interesting enough, and it's just weird the time we're living in. Like, it's weird. Like, we're looking at it and saying a strong America is good for not only America but for the world, but you're seeing so much division. Like, do you think there's any coming back from that? Like you said it yourself in this interview, you said, like, when one candidate loses, half the country's probably going to be upset, right?
Right. I know. I'm the eternal optimist, and I also like to find the silver lining on everything. So at a time in the world where everything feels so unstable and chaotic, at the same time, this is a beautiful moment to provide good leadership, to affect your communities in a positive way. People are looking for good leaders and strong communities, and they're so desperate for it. Honestly, They're more open to things now than they were when, they didn't feel like things were falling apart. But when you start feeling like the ground is moving beneath you, you start looking for the things that really matter, right? You start understanding what your real values are and what's going to make a difference. So I'm like, hey, this is a time to speak up and to provide leadership and to provide direction and engage in your community and do the kind of things that you guys are doing. You're running a business and then you're also trying to make a difference in the world. Like, that's amazing. I think we should all be trying to find ways to do that.
I have to tell you something off camera after about that. You'll appreciate it. So remind me. But it's funny because one of my clients, the good clients of ours, they moved out of Canada this summer and they went to Argentina. And they won't mind me sharing the story, but they went to Argentina. One of them is from Argentina. He's born there. And so they wanted to try it out because even in Canada, there's this overwhelming sense of just, I'll call it evil, but just, lack of normalcy, or however you want to say it, right? We're not going back to this sense of being the state of normal anymore, right? And so they tried a few places and they went to Argentina. So they left in August and I called them this month in September and I said, guys, what's going on? How you doing over there? Like, we're friends too. They're clients, but we're friends too. And they're like, we're coming back. I'm like, what? You just left. Like, you literally packed up everything and sold your cars and left.
Oh.
And you're coming back. You have 2 kids. Like, what are you doing? Right. So we're laughing. They're telling me what happened exactly. But the point is that we all agreed on that call. Like, we live in the best part of the world. And whether that's the US or Canada's been very socialist a long time, but still we have the freedoms, the safety, the security. You can be whatever you want. You can practice whatever religion you want or faith, and you're not discriminated against. You don't have to worry about bombs, things like that. But more recently, Canada's changed. And so these guys, we all agreed that we live in the best place. And you know what they said to me? They're like, this time around, we're going to be more involved. And when we're there, we're going to vote more, and we're going to vote in the elections, and we're going to take part in our communities, in our schools and things like that. And I think that's what we need to be doing, right?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now is the time to get involved in whatever way you can to make a difference in your community. And there's such a hunger for it, right? There's so many. And as you know, the economy is unstable as well. I don't know how things are in Canada, but I know, in the US, some people can barely put food on the table. Like, what can we be doing for people to make sure they have food and they have shelter and all these things? And, honestly, we need creativity once again in community projects. We need, we used to say, okay, you have a full-time job in that community development nonprofit, and I've got a full-time job over here in whatever civilian or government. But what if we took our experience in our various areas and we did something really crazy, cool, unique with it? Like, we used our creativity to solve community problems because we have a different perspective. Like, so for instance, like, from Breaking Cover from my book, there was an incredible, and it wasn't our idea, but incredible opportunity to help persecuted Iraqi Christians like your parents were, and to help find them a new safe place to go when ISIS had forced them out of their ancient villages. And what was so fascinating about that grouping of people who came together to do that project? It wasn't a job. It wasn't even officially a project. It wasn't even officially a nonprofit. It was just people who knew how to do their jobs really well in the world, who brought those expertise to the fore for this project. Like, who better to help refugees than my husband, who was a persecuted Christian from the region, native speaker of Arabic. We learned how to carry out complex operations in very difficult places. We learned diplomacy, so we know how to engage appropriately with governments. And so we came together and we were able to relocate 149 Christians from Kurdistan and Iraq to Slovakia. And that to me was such a fascinating experience. And it showed me like, don't ever put like limits on what you can do. Like, oh, I can only help if I start a nonprofit. No, we can do all kinds of things with our creativity to help other people out. Like,
especially with this nowadays, right? So there's so much technology behind it all, and you're just
yeah.
one degree away from people in the world, right? And yeah,
Absolutely. So I think we put a lot of limits on ourselves that don't really exist.
I do it every day, Michelle, every single day.
But it's true. It's like the
Yeah,
human condition, right?
I know. And then you always, you always realize you could achieve more once you go through that door, right? You could kind of
Yeah.
realize you're like, I've been selling myself short. That's just my own my own world for you. But I was gonna
I don't
ask.
think that worldview is unique, though, Matthew. I think that's the typical.
Yes,
Like, we
yes,
hold back out of fear, intimidation, uncertainty, and then you push yourself in one area, and then you see what you did. You're like, whoa,
yes.
I'm more capable than I thought I was.
Exactly. Before we get to the closing of this, I wanted to ask you. So, there's a school of thought, it seems like, in America that the CIA should, I don't want to say defunded because there's that defund the police stuff. It's not defunded. It's more that CIA and these other intelligence organizations, the FBI, that some people would consider completely getting rid of them and maybe consolidating them into one, or just kind of stripping them away of certain powers that they have. I don't exactly know the theory behind it or the school of thought, just maybe that they have a lot of power, there's corruption or whatnot. But, seeing as that you were part of the CIA at one point, like, how do you feel about that?
So, I believe that the reason why these discussions are happening is because we have bloated bureaucracies, and we have seen with our own eyes the ideological capture of these institutions. We've seen the political alignment of these agencies with different parts, with different parties and different positions, and we're not supposed to be political. The CIA is never supposed to tell anybody what to do. Our job is to literally collect the intel, pass it to policymakers or war fighters, and then they act on it. But the CIA has become this bloated organization that is very risk averse. And part of that is you can only be as risky as your government allows you to be. So you've got to have someone in a leadership position to say, let's be creative about how we carry out operations. Let's be more focused. That's definitely when I look at what like Israel has been doing, I'm like, oh my gosh, what a far cry from what we are in the CIA here. So in terms of creativity and willingness to push the boundaries on terrorism and terrorists, FBI has been captured politically, and we deserve better. Our country deserves better than that. I don't agree that they should be merged because they both have different sets of instructions and authorities that are given to them by the Constitution or by legislation. So, we the CIA cannot collect on Americans in the United States because that's very dangerous. We should only be collecting overseas. And then the FBI technically is supposed to be a law enforcement agency. So when something goes wrong, they're supposed to be able to come in and take care of that. If you merge those two authorities, then you've got problems. It's very hard to keep a firewall between in one organization. So they really do need to be two separate organizations, but they need to be thinned out, and hiring needs to change completely. We need to really invest in people who know, like, you're going to have somebody do Chinese ops, they better know China better than anybody's business. You want people to work counterterrorism in the Middle East, and you've got to understand the Arab world. Like, you've got to hire the best cyber operators, and you've got to pay them well, right? Or they're going to go off and start their own businesses and do things that, so you got to hire well, pay well. You have to really fundamentally change how you do business if you're going to improve on what we've got right now.
But the DEI requirements, Michelle, I feel like you're overlooking those requirements.
Like, look at me. I'm all about the values of diversity. Like, I my husband's from the Middle East. I'm a female in intelligence. But there has been, again, what I call an ideological capture. And so it's strayed from its initial good values, and it's become something different. It's give people a job for their skin color or for their background. And I don't want anybody to hire me because, I fit I'm a different gender. I want people to hire me because I am awesome at what I do.
Listen, I don't know what that feeling is like because I've never, ever fit the criteria for any kind of social program or anything. So I don't know what it's like.
I don't know if people know that. Tell them, Middle Easterners, you guys fall through the cracks completely.
Yeah, I get these whenever we were applying for applications for school or for something, it's you look at it and I always wondered because it would ask you, do you identify as, typically for us, you have the indigenous peoples, First Nations, and that's the biggest thing because they deserve, I think, a lot of reparations, but they're identified, they get benefits for certain things. And then it was just that those boxes are just so small, and then now it's grown to so many different options. And when I was there, it was very few options. It didn't fit the criteria. And now, if I was going back, I still don't fit the criteria. So I was just where do I come in? Where I don't get it. So I just said, no, there was no special exemptions. I'm Canadian, I don't see any other exemptions.
You're not white, you're not black, no. You're not Hispanic. Yeah.
I just felt
but you are a legitimate minority. Honestly. Yeah. My husband's in the same position, but yeah.
So you guys know the Middle Eastern. I think you'll appreciate this more because you understand the Middle Eastern culture so well. We went to interview. Have you ever heard of Patrick Bet David?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, they're in Florida too, their office, and we went to go interview a few people from their office. And Vincent Oshana is from where we're from, so we speak the same language. So we were there in January. We quickly went to go interview them, in and out. And Vincent happened to be the guy organizing us while we were there. We had 3 interviews all set for one day, and he was helping us organize. And once we got comfortable with him, we told him, I'm like, hey, you're Syrian, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, so are we. So we start speaking to him. He's like, why didn't you tell me this this whole time you've been here? And leading up to it, we were speaking with them and their team. And I'm like, because honestly, I didn't want an unfair advantage when it came to the culture. I wanted you guys to want to come on the podcast, want to do it with us for who we are and what we're saying and what we're doing now and what you can see versus that part. That's more the cherry on top. But that's always been my mindset. So it's very different from what's going on now.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and he didn't get a clue from your last name?
No, he had no idea. I don't even think if he might have known our last name or it came to mind. I don't even think.
Okay, because I saw your last name and I'm like, wait a minute, he might be a Syrian.
Yeah. So no, it didn't click. And when he found out, it went from it was such a great experience, but it went from being a great experience to now very community, very family friendly. He has a picture holding my son. It became that kind of engagement. Yeah. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So people like to stick together. We like to help out each other, and that's not just for our community. That's for other communities. But to go into a private organization or even a public organization and say that, we're hiring based on X, Y, and Z, and it has nothing to do with your talent or, your skill level, I feel like that only ends one way, and it's bad.
Yeah. And honestly, it doesn't help anybody out. I tell people it might take you longer to get noticed, but when you get noticed, you're going to get noticed for the right reasons. It's because you are so good at what you do. You are so knowledgeable. You are so excellent at your craft that nobody can ignore you. And I'm like, that's what you need to focus on.
I agree.
Developing your craft.
And there's a lot of people that's what they want to do. That's what they're striving for. I just think there's so much media behind what's going on right now and this marketing machine that's behind whatever agenda they want to promote. But I do think that for the most part, human beings, we're people oriented. We're striving for more. There's always what's next. Something comes after this. And so I think that people ultimately, they want to achieve, but, and I heard this recently and I really liked it. There needs to be that hope that if you're going to work towards something, you're going to do the right things, that you're going to be able to then achieve what it is you're trying to achieve. And that
Absolutely.
hope seems like it's what's missing.
Yeah.
I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but if I see like my hard-earned tax dollars going to people that they don't deserve it, meanwhile there's homeless people.
Like they could work and they're not working. They're choosing not to. They're making these decisions. Everyone makes decisions.
Yeah, or like 1 out of 10 Canadians, 1 out of 10 are actually going to a food shelter right now. So
wow.
why are we dealing with problems? I saw something the other day that we just increased our foreign aid to China. I'm like, I saw that.
What?
I'm like, it wasn't much.
What?
I'll be honest with you, it wasn't much. But I was like, what do
I
you
don't
mean?
care.
I'm like, what
Are
do
you
you
kidding
mean?
me?
Well, foreign aid to China. I'm like, we need it. I'm like, China doesn't need it. I'm like, we need it. I'm like, if you're gonna say foreign aid to Haiti or something like a third world country or something that's been devastated by like a hurricane, or Florida gets hit with a hurricane.
Not to the country that's literally collecting intelligence, stealing your secrets, stealing trade secrets, collecting so much data, sucking up data. Like, why would you help the country out that's literally your enemy? That, at least I know in the United States, I assume Canada, why not? But they're like breaking into critical infrastructure. They're implanting information collection capabilities. Like it's a war. It's a cyber war every day with China.
Yeah, and even if you go economically, like I feel like they're doing better than us anyway. What foreign aid? Like I just don't understand what that's for, right?
That would make my head explode. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it the other day and I'm like, are you kidding? I'm like, this is just like the cherry on top of the cherry at this point. I'm not understanding, but it seems like when you're speaking, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in your shoes that get what's going on. And you said something earlier that stuck with me, where you're saying maybe the FBI is investigating it. Maybe, there is some strategy behind it, and hopefully better days are ahead.
I would like to think that the vast majority of us have our heads screwed on straight, and that is really this tiny minority that has gotten a hold of media, and media is promoting it to look like it's this big thing. And I think most of us really are rational, scientific in approach, honestly. And so I think we are going to win, but it's just this, this curve, and we've got to kind of even out here. The rest of us have to engage.
Yeah, I agree. Michelle, before we close off the show, do you want to let people know where they can find you? Are you working on any new projects? Anything that you want to promote?
Yes, I have a giant project. So we mentioned my first book, Breaking Cover, which is a memoir, which came out several years ago. But now I have a second book, which is called Get Off the X, which is coming out in January. And if you've ever felt stuck in your life or your career, you don't know how to move forward, that is what Get Off the X is all about, how to get unstuck. So I'm just not one of those natural writers or authors. I have to work really, really hard to write a book and get it published. So for me, this is like a big deal. So that's January. And my whole mission, Matthew, is to help people not put those limits on themselves, to say, like, I'm willing to do hard things. I'm willing to go where others aren't. I'm willing to build myself up, because when you do that and you push through the fear and you push through the uncertainty, amazing things happen. So I'm just trying to get people to persevere till the magic happens, till the breakthrough occurs.
And for the uninitiated, when you say get off the X, it's a CIA term, is it not?
Yeah, so it's a security term that essentially means the X is where an attack is launched against you, whether the attack is by terrorists or criminals or cartels, doesn't matter. The X is where you're most vulnerable. And so what they tell you when they're teaching you how to not become a death statistic is to get off the X. Your best chance of survival is moving. And however you can move off the X, that's what you've got to do. So you have to get off the X. And so I've taken that security concept and I've applied it to life in general, because I just realized, like, oh, you know what? The X is the comfort zone. And we get stuck there all the time. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have. I feel like I'm an expert at feeling stuck and then pushing myself forward and, making it work. So I got a PhD in that now.
Yeah, I'm an expert. Trust me, I do this all the time. But yeah, breakthroughs are amazing and they do happen. So you just got to keep persevering, like you said.
Yeah, but they're not quick. But if you think that's how life works, you're just going to give up way too fast. And so, especially for the millennials, this program, right, is teaching the millennials that you do have to hang in there, because I just see it left and right. People are giving up. People giving up. And I'm like, no. You got to fight. You got to fight. You got to keep moving forward. You got to keep, even if they're little movements, like that matters.
Yes.
That makes a difference. So if you have this expectation that winning happens fast, forget it. It doesn't.
Those days that I don't feel as motivated, because it happens to everybody, I just say, you know what? You got to get through it. And when I was working with one of my coaches, we figured out that it's just the grit. It's just the grit ultimately that's going to separate you from doing it or not doing it. And it's just that grit for me.
Yeah. What's that one thing you can do that morning, that day, when you don't feel good or you feel anxious or whatever? What's the one thing you can do to move yourself forward? Exactly. And it's just that simple and that profound at the same time.
January, I want a copy of that book, so I want to know how to order it. If there's any pre-orders,
absolutely,
let us know.
Yes, maybe we'll do another, if you have time for another podcast on getting unstuck. But if people want to find me, you could just either type in Michelle CIA, or my full name is Michelle Rigby Assad, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Amazing.
And I have my own website, so
we'll put all those links in the description, in the notes, the show notes. And I'm so glad we did this. I wrote solo on this one, but Danny sends his regards, and I hope we will do it again in the near future.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Michelle. All right, choicers, till next time, we're out.